Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another day in eyeshadow palette week, where every single day for 7 days in a row you're getting some sort of palette themed content from me. And today I'm really excited to be sharing my first update in my Roulette palette series. Essentially I put all of the eyeshadow palettes that have so far this year gone unused by me. If you're interested in watching all of my unused palettes in my collection video, I'll leave that link down below. But I put all of those into my Tiny Decisions app, and I randomly selected 4 eyeshadow palettes to work on, kind of gather my thoughts on, get use out of, do I want to declutter anything, etc. And I asked for your guys' feedback on things that you would like me to share in my updates for these videos. And many of you suggested that I do a palette bingo with all of the palettes that I was focused on. So we are going to start with a palette bingo, and then I'm going to share one look that I created from each palette. One thing that I've been trying to focus on the latter half of this year is actually creating full looks from just a single eyeshadow palette. Sometimes I'll have like 8 or 9 eyeshadow palettes open on my desk at a time, and I'm reaching into them for just one shade or whatever, and it's really hard to kind of get a feel on whether or not you actually like just that palette, like that sole palette that you're using or testing, if you don't try and create a full look with it. Maybe you like the palette for like a single shade or a couple of shades, but when it comes to like if you had to create a full look with that palette, maybe it's just not the palette for you. So I do have one look from each eyeshadow palette to share with you guys. We will be sharing how many times I used each palette, whether or not I hit pan on any of the shades in these palettes, and then we will be also sharing if I'm decluttering anything and rolling in 4 new palettes to focus on for the next month. So if you're excited, stay tuned. First, if you've yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or you just like to chit chat about makeup, I would love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's get into the video. All right guys, so I did just film the palette bingo and I created this look right here, which I'm actually pretty impressed with. Sorry to spoil it. I feel like that actually would kind of be spoiling the palette bingo because you're already seeing the end look. I didn't think about that. Oh well. Oh well, then at least if you're not interested in the palette bingo portion, you see the look and whatever. If you are interested, you're interested. I'll try and leave timestamps down below if you're only interested in certain parts of the video. So we're gonna start with the palette bingo and let's roll that footage. Okay, I've never done a palette bingo on my channel before or ever, so it'll be really interesting to see how this goes. I do have all of the rest of my face makeup done, and I did set my eyes using the Urban Decay primer potion and just like a cream shade, I think, for my Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. So because I only have 4 palettes and I do want to do 5 shades, it seems like typically people randomly generate 5 shades for a palette bingo. I'm going to randomly generate 2 shades from the palette that I used the least. So the palette that I used the least out of the 4 is my Makeup by Mario Rosy Glam Quad, and we can just start here. We will randomly generate 2 shades out of this palette. So going into my Pretty Random app, we're going to randomly generate, and we'll just go across like so. So 2 numbers. Hello? Why do I keep getting 0? Your numbers have been rolled. Clear history to start again. Okay, there we go. All right, here we go. So we get number 1, which is the silver shade, which is the shade that I feel like has been the reason I haven't decluttered this palette, but I am thinking about possibly decluttering this. And we get number 3, ooh, which is this shade right here. So let me swatch these out. I am very curious how this is going to go because I feel like I struggle so much to create makeup looks in my head. So here is where we are at with the first 2 shades. Okay, next we will go into my Nabla Dreamy 2 palette, which has 12 shades, and we will randomly generate 1 shade from this palette. This one already does have 3 pans in the palette, which is super exciting. And we get number 7, which is going to be this shade right here, Amarcord. This looks really similar to the red shade that I already rolled in from the Rosy palette. Okay, interesting. So there is that shade swatched right there. That one is super beautiful. Next up, we have the Natasha Denona Love Palette. This one has 15 shades. So we're gonna randomly generate again, and we get number 2. This is really interesting. I have no matte shades currently, and this is the shade that we get. It is in the shade Lifetime, which is actually a shade that I love out of this palette. It is such a beautiful shade. There is Lifeline. Not sure what I'm gonna do yet. And then finally we have my Pat McGrath Divine Rose palette. And this palette has 10 shades, so we're gonna randomly generate a number from here. And we get number 6, which is gonna be, ooh, we do get a matte, and it's a matte brown, a deep matte brown shade. It's not the worst like color story I've ever seen. I'm still a little bit nervous because I don't know, I feel like I'm not gonna do anything like super impressive because I already get super stressed out about how I do my eyeshadow. So I'm gonna practice on one eye and then I'll do the other eye for you. Well, no, I feel like the fun in it is like seeing the look get created. Okay, this is gonna be so interesting. I'm gonna do my best not to add any additional shades. So I am just going to start with the dark matte brown out of the Pat McGrath Divine Rose, and I'm gonna go in with a super fluffy brush, and I'm gonna try and do it super lightly and see how we can potentially diffuse that brown. And if anything, maybe I'll grab like a face powder and see if I can diffuse it that way. I don't know if that's cheating. Okay, I zoomed you guys in a little bit more. So just going in. So just going in with this brown, tapping the majority off. And I'm gonna start low just in case I feel like I cannot diffuse this shade very well. Please do not judge my eyeshadow skills. This is why I never do like get ready with me's or anything like that, because I just feel like I need all the focus I can get when I'm doing my eyeshadow, and this is like stressing me out. Okay, let's see how we can get it to blend upwards. I don't feel like I'm gonna get as diffused as a look as I want blending this upwards, so shoot. I'm gonna have to be careful and creative with this. What can I do? Shoot, I don't know. We're gonna have to see. Okay, this always happens to me. My eyes never match. I went in to add the brown to the other eye and it obviously went way higher than this eye. So we're gonna just have to build this up on the other eye then so that they are matching. And we're really just gonna have to, hope for the best on this. We're gonna call it good with that brown shade for right now. Next, I think I'm gonna go in with this shade from the the Mario Rosy Glam Quad. And I'm just gonna pack that on to the outer portion of my eye and see kind of what that looks like. So for this, I'm actually gonna take a more dense brush than like a flat shader brush. This is it's from the Vintage Cosmetics company, but I'm not sure what's the name of the actual brush, but I'm just going to pack that on. Shoot, I'm getting fallout. This is why I never do my eyes first. But I'm packing this on to the outer portion of the lid. Just like that. Okay, and then I'm gonna stamp it in the crease a little bit as well, but I'm gonna come back and blend this with a smaller brush just to see. I don't know what I'm doing. No, not at all. I'm gonna take this smaller brush. This is the Morphe 506, and I'm gonna dip back into the brown from the Pat McGrath palette, and I'm going to try and blend these two together a little bit more. I don't know how this is going to go. This is why I never do eyeshadow on camera, or let alone a palette bingo. Okay, next I'm just taking a like clean brush, and I'm going to blend around the edges of this. We're not a complete disaster yet. I'm going to take a clean, even fluffier brush now to really try and just diffuse the top of this. I actually like the way that like rosy shade from the Mario palette kind of blended with the deep brown matte from the Pat McGrath palette. I feel like those two together actually look pretty nice. Okay, I had to put my hair up because I felt like things were getting serious. I actually really like the way that those two blended together to make this sort of like brownish, purplish, maroon shade. I'm next going to add my Too Faced glitter glue to my lid because I really want these two shimmers to pop on my lid. Okay, I've laid that glitter glue down, and now I'm going to go in with the Nabla, the shade from the Nabla Dreamy 2, which is this beautiful red shade right here. And I'm going to place that on the majority of my lid, but not like the very like inner corner. So I'm just going to tap that onto my lid. I love these shimmers in this Nabla palette. I just think they are, all of them have like such a high impact, and I think they're so beautiful. I might come back with that shade from the Mario palette and really stamp that on the outer part of the eye, but we shall see. Okay, so this is what we are looking like now. I think I'm gonna go stamp just a little bit more of this to the very outside part of my eye, just on the very outer corner, to try and mesh those two shades just a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, I do enjoy how that looks. Now we're going to take the shade from the Natasha Denona Love palette, which is this one right here, and I'm going to pop that on the inner corner of my eye, or like the inner portion. Just like that. And then I'm just kind of going over just a little bit that shade from the Nabla palette, just so that they kind of blend together. Okay, I actually really do like that. I've really been enjoying just adding like a little bit of a wing with like a deep shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the brown shadow from the Pat McGrath palette, and on an angled brush, this is from Moda, it's their BMX 498, which I really enjoy for this technique. I'm just essentially going to start on my lower lash line but come up just a little bit so that it adds just like the tiniest wing. Yeah, that'll be fine. I don't know if you'll even be able to see that, especially because usually I go in with like an even darker shade, but then I'm going to try and stamp some of this also just on the upper lash line to try and just deepen the upper lash line, because I do like that look. And I'm going to carry this out to about here. So on the other eye. Okay, I did the same thing on the other eye, and then, ooh, I didn't think through how I'm going to blend this all together. I think I'm gonna go in with this shade again from the Mario palette and see how this blends out. And I'm gonna go about halfway, maybe a little bit more, because then I'm gonna take that silver shade from this palette and use that on the lower lash line. We're looking a little crazy, but that's okay. We're gonna just trust that it's all gonna come together. Okay, now on this little tiny pencil brush, it's actually the e.l.f. concealer brush, but I always use this for my inner corner. I'm gonna go in with our final shade, which is the silver shade. Here it is swatched out. And I'm gonna pop that onto the inner corner. It might be, oh yeah, I don't know if this is gonna work for an inner corner. We'll see. But I'm also going to bring it just like down my lower lash line, about a third of the way out, like that. It works. It's a little deeper than I would prefer for an inner corner. And there's quite a bit of fallout. I don't know that I love the silver there, but I also don't know how else I would have integrated that. I'm gonna quickly add some liner to my lower lash line and mascara, and we will be right back. All right guys, I am back, and here is the final look. I'm gonna take a peek in my little quad mirror here. I actually do not hate this, especially for my first palette bingo. I feel like I did kind of botch the wings, and we're looking like a little more dramatic than I typically would enjoy, like underneath the eyes. But I would say for my first palette bingo, I actually don't mind this look, and I will feel comfortable potentially filming another video after this one. I wanted to do that, but I was a little bit nervous that this would go really haywire and not be a good situation, but I feel comfortable, like I can film another video after this. I do not hate this look at all. So now that we're done with the palette bingo, let's get into all of the information that I have to share about the palettes that I've been focused on the last 6 weeks or so. Now that we're done with the palette bingo, I want to share each palette with you guys, a look from the palette that I created, how many times I used the palette, and whether or not I plan on keeping the palette in my collection. So we're going to start with the Makeup by Mario palette, because I actually do not have a single look to share with you guys from this palette. It's actually a quad. I don't know, I call my quads my palettes as well. And I used this quad only 2 times, with the exception of today would have made the 3rd time. I didn't create a full look with this palette because I decided I want to declutter this. I wasn't excited to reach for this. It really wasn't until the last couple of days that I even got those couple of uses, just because I was like, shoot, I really need to film this update. I need to like get use out of this palette. And to be honest with you, the only shade that like really excites me out of this palette is this one right here. And I don't really reach for silver shades all that often. And if I want a silver shade, I have a few scattered throughout my collection. So I just don't feel like I need to keep this palette. I do plan to film a palette declutter pretty shortly. Hopefully that'll be up in the next couple of weeks, and you will see me decluttering this palette because I just am not that excited about it. I think the quality is good with this palette. It's just the color story. I still have my bronzage palette from Makeup by Mario, and I plan to keep that. I love that palette, but I have decided that I will be decluttering this one. Up next, we have the Pat McGrath Divine Rose 2 palette, or Divine Rose 1 palette. This is the original. So I reached for this 4 times. Today would make the 5th time. And I do like the look that I created out of this. It was more dramatic than I think I originally had intended in my head. And I've said a couple of times on my channel, I'm not sure if this video will be up yet or not, but if not, it will be coming this week. I have a video talking about palettes I would return or declutter if I could get my money back for them, and I actually included this palette in that video simply because of all of my Pat McGrath palettes, this is the one that I get least excited about. And I don't know if it's the color story or what, but the only shades that really excite me out of this palette are these 4 right here. Like if this was a quad, 100% would buy this quad, but the rest of the shades are, they just don't excite me. Like they're fine quality, they're good. It's just, I feel a little bit limited in like my creativity with this palette. It doesn't inspire me as much as my other Pat McGrath palettes, and I am obviously going to keep this because I did spend a lot of money on it and I still enjoy it. Again, I really do enjoy these 4 shades, but the palette as a whole not as excited for it as I thought that I originally would have been. Next up, we have my Natasha Denona Love palette, and I actually only reached for this palette 3 times. This is a palette that I really wanted when it released, but I held off, and then I heard so many people raving about this palette, so my husband actually finally bought me this palette for Valentine's Day this year. This is what the palette looks like. It is really, really beautiful. It just has some richer pinks and reds that just are not what I necessarily gravitate towards, and I've really come to realize that when it comes to pinks and reds and purples, I prefer like the more muted mauves rather than like these really rich, really pigmented shades. I do really love this palette for the shimmers. I think the shimmers are beautiful. The look that I created with this palette, again, more dramatic than I think I had originally been anticipating, and I feel like I was surprised when I was looking over things that I only reached for this 3 times, because when I rolled this in, I was actually really excited to feel motivated to reach for this, and I felt like I reached for it more than the 3 times that I did. I still feel like this will be a fun one to pull out even for like winter and New Year's. I feel like even though it's like more of like the Valentine's-y type palette, I feel like there's some fun that you can have with the shades in here, with the deeper purples. And again, if I want like a silver, I have it right here, so I don't need the one in that Makeup by Mario palette because I have a silver right here. So I really enjoy this palette. I actually enjoyed the 3 times that I used it, and the 3 times that I used it, I want to say I pretty much exclusively used this palette rather than reaching into it for just one shade, but I do need to reach for that one a little bit more frequently. And then the palette that I reached for the most was my Nabla Dreamy 2 palette. I was actually surprised that I had not reached for this one at all this year, because this last year was one of my favorite palettes. I had 2 pans in this palette going into this, and I do have a new pan to share. Hopefully it will pick up on screen. Yes? No? Hello? There, hopefully you can see a new pan, and then I also have pans in these 2 shades right here. This is a really, really beautiful palette. I love the shimmers in here. They're super, super bold and intense and just really high impact. I feel really creatively inspired when I reach into this palette, even though it doesn't look like the most exciting palette. Every time I reach into this, my look does, like, it turns out completely different than what I had thought going in, but I always love my look when I use this palette. I ended up reaching for this palette a total of 17 times, so I did get a ton of use out of it. It had gone completely unloved the first 6 months of the year, but this got a ton of love the last couple of months for me, and I'm really happy that this was rolled into this project. This is something I anticipate I will reach for a ton in the wintertime as well. This just seems to be a go-to wintertime palette for me, but got a ton of use out of this. I will quickly share the look that I created with this palette, and then we will get into the new palettes, or selecting the new palettes that I will be working on for the next month. Okay, so I have my Tiny Decisions app pulled up, and we are going to randomly generate 4 new palettes to work on. So we get, I could have done a screen record, I suppose. We get the Lunar New Year palette. I'm not super excited about that, but that's okay. Maybe I'll decide I want to declutter that. Next up, we get the Melt Rust palette. That's actually really exciting because that is a palette that I want to reach for this time of year. Then we get the ColourPop Lil Ray of Sunshine palette, also one that I had pulled out for the fall. So I am loving the way that this is actually turning out. And then for the 4th palette, we get the ColourPop Taupe palette. Okay. Yes, I can handle this. Okay, I'm gonna go grab those palettes and I will be right back to share them with you. Okay, so I have the 4 palettes that we are going to be focused on for the next month. Up first, I have the BH Lunar New Year palette. I've only reached for this a handful of times. I honestly never should have purchased this palette. This was like, I just willy-nilly purchased this at the beginning of the year. There are some really fun colors in here, but there's also quite a few pressed glitters. So this is good that it's going. I'm like, this is good that it's going to be going in the series, because then I can kind of decide whether or not I want to keep this, hopefully get a little bit of consistent use out of this, and then decide if this is going to stay in my collection or if I'm going to declutter it. Then we selected the Melt Rust palette. I love this palette. I think it's so beautiful for the fall time. This is what this looks like. I do have one pan in it, and I will take pictures of these palettes just like I did the other 4 and update you guys on what the palette looked like when I rolled it in versus what it looks like when I update you guys next time, just to kind of see what the wear looks like. But I'm so excited to have even extra motivation to reach for this beautiful palette for the fall. And then another great fall palette is the ColourPop Lil Ray of Sunshine palette. This is an all matte palette. This is what this one looks like. This is going to be another really beautiful one for the fall. I feel like this and the Melt Rust will actually pair really nicely together, or even I feel like I've gotten lucky with palettes, like their color stories all kind of cohesively going together. I feel like I could even potentially, is it all, there's all pressed glitters except for like 3 shimmers in this. I feel like maybe I could try and pair these 2 together as well. But I'm really excited to have another excuse to reach for that palette. And then the ColourPop That's Taupe palette. This is a really beautiful cool tone palette. It's not my favorite ColourPop formula. I do find that the mattes in this are a little bit, they're like exceptionally powdery, but I do love me a good cool tone palette, and I would love to have another excuse to kind of reach for this and play around with this a little bit more. I feel like the more I use this, the more I did enjoy it, and I think that these shimmers in here are actually really beautiful, and I feel like I haven't played around with cool tones as much this year. I've been really into just like warm browns and neutrals, so it'll be fun to pull this out and get this some love as well. But after that, that is actually going to conclude this update for the palette roulette series. I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you have any feedback, comments, or things that you want me to add to my next update, I would love to hear from you guys. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video, for supporting my channel, for supporting Palette Week, and just for supporting me in general. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye!